Hey friends, welcome back to Unpolished by Called. I'm Kathrin Shaffer. If you've ever shown up to your life, your faith, quiet time, or your prayers and thought, I know what I believe, so why don't I feel it? Then you're in the right place. There's this quiet pressure in Christian spaces to feel inspired all the time, to feel peace, joy, confidence, to feel close to God. And when those feelings don't show up, it can make you wonder if you did something wrong, you missed something, or you drifted further than you realized. But here's the thing we don't talk about enough. Feelings are weather, not foundations. They move, shift, they roll in and out without asking permission. Faith, though, that's the ground under your feet. So today, we're talking about what it means to keep walking with God when the emotional fireworks are nowhere to be found. No spiritual goosebumps, cinematic soundtracks, just ordinary, steady trust. And if that sounds a little less glamorous than the highlight reels, good. That's exactly where real faith lives. Let's settle in. There's a moment most of us hit in our faith that no one really prepares us for. It's not a crisis. Not exactly. Nothing explodes. No dramatic turning point. It's quieter than that. You wake up one day and realize the feelings that used to carry you just aren't carrying you right now. You still believe, show up, but the emotional volume knob got turned way down. And you're left wondering if the signal is still there or if you're just talking into the void. And because we're human, our first instinct is to treat faith like a mood ring. If it's glowing, we think we're doing great. If it's dull, we assume something must be wrong. Maybe we didn't pray enough, we're distracted, we're slipping. Maybe God feels distant because we are distant. But what if the absence of strong feelings isn't a sign of failure? What if it's an invitation into something sturdier? See, feelings are powerful, but they're terrible navigators. They're like enthusiastic tour guides who sometimes point confidently in the wrong direction. They tell you what's happening inside you, not what's true outside you. And faith, at its core, isn't built on the temperature of your emotion. It's built on trust in a reality that doesn't wobble every time your mood does. Think about any long relationship, friendship, marriage, family. The strength of it isn't measured by how intensely you feel every single day. If that were the standard, nobody would last past year 2. Real closeness grows in the ordinary, the consistent, the showing up when nothing feels particularly cinematic. Faith works the same way. There's a kind of spiritual maturity that starts when the novelty wears off. Early on, everything feels new, electric, alive. You notice every small shift. You're hyper aware of every moment of connection. But over time, that intensity settles into something quieter. Less adrenaline, more endurance, less spark, more flame. And that shift can feel unsettling if no one tells you it's normal. Because you might assume that steady means stagnant, when really it often means rooted. The truth is, emotional intensity isn't the same thing as depth. A campfire that burns steadily through the night might not look as dramatic as fireworks, but it will keep you warm a whole lot longer. When feelings fade, you find out what your faith is actually resting on. Not the vibe, the music, the moment, just trust. And trust is interesting because it rarely feels heroic while you're doing it. It looks like getting up and living your life while still choosing to believe God is present even when you don't feel particularly inspired. It looks like praying honestly instead of eloquently, like continuing to care about truth, even when your emotions are busy caring about literally everything else. Steadiness doesn't get to the same applause as passion, but it's the thing that keeps you moving forward when passion takes a day off. There's also something freeing about realizing you don't have to manufacture feelings to prove your faith is alive. You don't have to hype yourself into some emotional state to be doing it right. You don't have to chase spiritual highs like they're the only evidence God is near. Because if closeness to God depended on emotional intensity, then people who are tired, grieving, burnt out, or just wired differently would always feel like second-class citizens in their own faith. And that's not how this works. Faith isn't validated by how dramatic it feels. It's revealed by how steady it stays. There's a quiet courage in continuing to trust when nothing inside you is throwing confetti. When your prayers feel simple, when your days feel ordinary, when your heart isn't swelling with inspiration, but you still lean in anyway. And honestly, that kind of faith is less fragile because it doesn't collapse the minute your mood shifts. It doesn't depend on perfect condition. It's portable. You can carry it into messy weeks, tired seasons, confusing moments, and it still holds. We live in a culture that trains us to treat feelings as the ultimate authority. If you feel it, it must be true. If you don't feel it, it must not be. But feelings are signals, not verdicts. They're part of the story, not the whole plot. Sometimes the most grounded thing you can say is, I don't feel close to God today, but I still trust that He's close. That sentence might not sound dramatic, but it's incredibly strong. It separates your internal weather from the reality you're choosing to stand on. There's also kindness in giving yourself permission to have emotional off days without turning them into spiritual emergencies. Not every dip in feeling is a crisis. Sometimes you're just tired. Your brain chemistry is doing its own thing. Life is loud. Faith doesn't require you to be emotionally impressive. It asks you to be honest and willing. And when you stop measuring your spiritual health by how inspired you feel, something shifts. The pressure lifts. You realize you can be human and faithful at the same time. You can have doubts, fatigue, flat days, distracted prayers, and still be deeply rooted. That's the beauty of steadiness. It doesn't demand perfection. It just keeps going. So if you're in a season where your faith feels quieter than it used to, it doesn't mean you're losing something. You might actually be gaining depth. The roots grow underground where nobody sees them long before the tree looks impressive above ground. And maybe this week is an invitation to redefine what strong faith looks like. Not constant emotional intensity, but quiet resilience. Not always feeling certain, but choosing to trust anyway. Not spiritual fireworks, but a steady light that doesn't go out when the night gets long. Because faith that survives without constant emotional reinforcement is faith that can survive almost anything. There's a subtle shift that happens when we stop expecting faith to feel amazing all the time. It's like the moment you realize a good relationship isn't built on butterflies alone, but on the quiet decision to stay, to listen, to keep choosing each other on ordinary days. That realization doesn't make the relationship less meaningful. It actually makes it more durable. And the same is true with God. When the emotional highs aren't driving the car, you start to notice the smaller, steadier ways faith shows up. Not as a rush, but as a rhythm. Not as a spark, but as a pulse. You see it in the way you pause before reacting, the way you hold on to hope even when the day is unimpressive, the way you keep showing up to the conversation even when it feels one-sided. And here's the paradox. The less you chase a feeling, the more genuine your faith becomes. Because it's no longer dependent on a mood. It's anchored in something outside of you. Feelings are inherently self-focused. They're about what's happening in your internal landscape. Faith, though, points outward. It says, even if my internal landscape looks like a foggy Tuesday, I still trust the sun exists above the clouds. That kind of trust grows quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. And there's a freedom in realizing you don't have to interpret every emotional dip as distance from God. You don't have to overanalyze every prayer that feels flat. You don't have to panic when you're not riding a wave of inspiration. You can just keep walking. And that's where steadiness becomes powerful. Because it builds a life, not just a moment. Emotional highs are like sprints. They're exciting, intense, memorable. But nobody lives in a sprint. Real life happens at a walking pace. And faith that can walk, not just run, is faith that lasts. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is live your ordinary life with quiet trust. Go to work, make dinner, answer emails, rest when you're tired, laugh when something's funny, pray when you think of it. Not because you're trying to manufacture a feeling, but because you're living in relationship. There's no performance required. And this matters because a lot of us carry an unspoken fear. If I don't feel it, maybe it's not real. But reality doesn't vanish just because your emotions are having a low energy day. Gravity still works when you're sad. The sun still rises when you're tired. And God's presence isn't toggled on and off by your mood. Feelings are responsive. Faith is responsive too, but in a different way. Feelings respond to circumstances. Faith responds to truth. When you ground yourself in that, you stop being so easily shaken by internal fluctuations. You learn to notice your feelings without letting them write the entire narrative. That doesn't mean feelings are bad or irrelevant. They're part of being human, and they can be beautiful. Joy, awe, peace, gratitude. Those moments are gifts, but they're not the foundation. They're more like the weather that passes over the landscape of a much deeper reality. The danger comes when we reverse the order, when we make the weather the proof that the ground exists. Then every cloudy day feels like a crisis. Steady faith flips that. It says, the ground is still here, even if today's forecast is uninspiring. And there's something profoundly calming about that perspective. It allows you to relax into your faith instead of constantly evaluating it. You don't have to keep checking the emotional dashboard to see if everything is still working. You can trust the engine even when the ride feels quiet. Over time, this kind of steadiness builds resilience. You become less reactive, less thrown off by the ebb and flow of your inner life. You learn that you can feel disconnected and still be deeply connected. You can feel uncertain and still be held. It's a bit like learning to swim in deeper water. At first, you panic when your feet can't touch the bottom, but eventually you realize the water itself can hold you up if you relax into it. Faith matures in that same space. When you stop needing constant reassurance and start trusting the support that's already there. And the steadiness has ripple effects. It changes how you approach hard seasons. When challenges come, and they always do, you're not relying on fragile emotional high to carry you through. You've built something more stable, something that can absorb impact without collapsing. You don't have to feel brave to act with courage. You don't have to feel peaceful to choose trust. You don't have to feel inspired to keep showing up. And that's the quiet strength of faith that isn't dependent on mood. There's also humility in it, because you start to recognize that your emotional state isn't the center of the universe. Reality doesn't revolve around how you feel in a given moment. And strangely, that realization is liberating. It takes the pressure off your emotions to perform. They can just be what they are, signals, not dictators. When you live like that, your faith becomes less fragile and more spacious. There's room for joy, doubt, clarity, confusion. There's room for energy, exhaustion. And none of those states disqualify you from being deeply rooted. You begin to see that faith isn't proven in the moments when it's easy to believe. It's revealed in the moments when belief is a quiet choice instead of an emotional reflex. That choice doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it looks like whispering a simple prayer when you'd rather scroll your phone. Sometimes it looks like reminding yourself of what you know to be true when your feelings are telling a different story. It looks like doing the next right thing without waiting for a surge of motivation. And those small choices add up. They form a life. And over time, you might even notice that steadiness brings a different kind of peace. Not the euphoric kind, but the grounded kind. The kind that doesn't spike and crash. The kind that feels like standing on solid ground instead of balancing on a tightrope. It's quieter, but it's deeper. And maybe that's the invitation this week. To stop judging your faith by how intense it feels and start noticing how faithfully you keep showing up. To let go of the expectation that every day needs to feel spiritually electric. To trust that God is just as present in the calm as He is in the fireworks. Because the goal isn't to feel constant spiritual adrenaline. The goal is relationship. And relationships are built in the steady accumulation of small moments, not just the big emotional ones. So if your faith feels simple right now, or quiet, a little ordinary, you're not doing it wrong. You might actually be stepping into something stronger. something that doesn't disappear when the feelings ebb. And that kind of faith, steady, grounded, resilient kind, is the kind that can carry you through a lifetime. So if this week feels a little quieter inside than you wish it did, take a breath. You're not behind. You're not failing some invisible spiritual exam. You're just human, learning how to trust something deeper than a mood. Faith isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's a steady candle on a kitchen table while life hums in the background. It's choosing to believe that God is present even when your emotions are doing absolutely nothing impressive. And that kind of trust, the quiet kind, ordinary kind, is the kind that lasts. So my hope this week is that you give yourself permission to stop chasing a feeling and start noticing the steadiness that's already there. The small moments of trust, the tiny yeses, the way you keep showing up even when it feels simple. And that's not boring faith, that's rooted faith. If this episode met you where you are today, you know the drill. Share it with someone who might need that reminder that they don't have to feel inspired to stay grounded. And if you want to keep supporting this space so we can keep having these honest, unpolished conversations, you can find everything linked in the show notes. The free resources, the ways to walk deeper, and the community that keeps us going long term. Thanks for spending this time with me. Wherever you are today, steady, tired, hopeful, unsure, remember, you're not walking alone, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, friends.